Elias Varga moved with purpose through the narrow alleyways, his gray eyes sharp beneath the dark sweep of his mask. He paused at a junction where the murmur of the festival faded into the distant lapping of canal waters. The night was growing colder, and the chill seeped through the layers of his tailored coat. Ahead, a figure leaned against the brick wall, rugged, weathered, his short beard catching the faint light of a flickering lantern. Marco Bellini exhaled slowly, the tension in his stance unmistakable. Elias didn't waste words. "Detective Bellini," he said, voice low but firm. "We need to talk." Marco's eyes narrowed, skepticism etched in every line of his face. "I don't know what game you're playing, Varga," he replied gruffly. "But I'm not interested in another foreigner telling me how to do my job." The air between them was thick, charged with years of unspoken grievances and the weight of their separate burdens. Elias stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "This isn't about jurisdiction or pride. There's a killer, one who changes faces like masks. You know the streets better than anyone. I need your insight." For a moment, Marco's harsh exterior flickered with something softer, regret, perhaps, or recognition of a common enemy. "Fine," he said finally, the word heavy with reluctant acceptance. "But this partnership comes with conditions." Inside the precinct, the atmosphere was stifling, the stale scent of old paperwork mingling with the bitter tang of strong coffee. Marco spread out a series of maps and reports, his fingers tracing routes and recent incidents. "These neighborhoods," he said, voice low, "they're where the killer blends best. People come and go, faces change every night. The masquerade only makes it easier." Elias absorbed the information, noting the pragmatic edge in Marco's observations. "Your experience on the streets will fill the gaps my intel can't reach," he acknowledged. "Together we have a better chance." Despite the tentative collaboration, mistrust simmered beneath their exchanges. Marco's guarded eyes often darted to Elias, searching for signs of hidden agendas. Elias, in turn, masked his frustrations behind a calm exterior, aware that any misstep could unravel their fragile alliance. Later, as the fog curled around the lamp-lit canals, the two men met on a narrow bridge overlooking the water. Their breath formed clouds in the cold night air as they exchanged guarded words. The distant laughter of festival revelers seemed worlds away from their grim reality. "You think you can just walk into this city and fix everything?" Marco challenged quietly. "No," Elias admitted, "but I can try. And with your help, maybe we stand a chance." Marco's gaze softened for a brief moment. "I'm not the man I used to be," he confessed. "But maybe this is the redemption I need." In a small, rundown corner of Venice, Marco knelt before a modest shrine adorned with faded photographs and flickering candles. The faint tolling of church bells echoed through the alleys, underscoring the solemnity of his vow. It was a personal reckoning, a quiet promise to protect the city he loved despite the scars of his past. The uneasy partnership forged that night was a fragile thread woven through layers of mistrust and shared desperation. As the masquerade's masks concealed more than faces, Elias and Marco's alliance became the thin line between chaos and order. The city's shadows deepened, and with every step the deadly game grew more intricate. Would their combined strengths be enough to unmask the killer before the final midnight? The answer hung in the air, as elusive as the shifting faces around them. The clock ticked relentlessly onward, each moment drawing them closer to a truth that could shatter everything. The second murder had shaken the fragile threads of his investigation. He stood at the edge of a narrow alleyway near the Rialto market, the flickering glow of lanterns casting long shadows across the cobblestones. The body lay crumpled beneath a wrought iron balcony, an intricate mask shattered nearby, its fragments glinting like jagged teeth. The victim's face was obscured beneath a fresh mask, but the telltale signs were clear, the same cruel precision as the first, the same deliberate message from a killer who wore masks as easily as breathing. Elias crouched, fingers steady despite the chill that ran through his spine. The scene was silent save for the distant lapping of water against the wooden pilings. His breath formed faint clouds in the cold air as he traced the bloodstains, a cryptic trail that seemed to vanish as quickly as it appeared. The killer moved like a ghost, slipping through the festival's throng with an ease that defied logic. The masquerade was a living puzzle, a kaleidoscope of shifting faces and whispered secrets. Each night birthed a new mask, a new lie, and Elias was trapped in a deadly game where time was both enemy and ally. 13 nights to unmask a phantom. His thoughts were interrupted by the soft footsteps of Sofia Marini emerging from the shadows like a wraith. She was a fixture in the nightlife of Venice, her keen ears and sharper wits a valuable asset in the labyrinth of rumors and half-truths. "They say the killer is everywhere and nowhere," Sofia murmured, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Slipping past guards and slipping into crowds unseen. A shadow beneath shadows." Elias nodded, the weight of her words pressing down on him and the masks. "Masks are their armor," Sofia replied, eyes gleaming with a mixture of fear and fascination. "A new face for every night, every kill? You can't trust what you see." The room around them buzzed with muffled laughter and the clinking of glasses, a stark contrast to the deadly dance unfolding beneath the veneer of celebration. Later, Elias met with Marco Bellini on a narrow bridge overlooking the Grand Canal. The detective's rugged face was etched with fatigue and frustration, a cigarette burning low between his fingers. "This killer's playing us," Marco growled, voice low and rough. "Changing faces like they're swapping coats? We're chasing ghosts?" Elias exhaled slowly, his piercing gray eyes scanning the masked revelers passing beneath them. "We have to find a pattern. Something consistent." "Patterns are for the predictable," Marco muttered, flicking ash into the dark water below. "This one's a chameleon." The ticking clock pressed on, each passing hour a reminder that time was not on their side. Elias felt the walls closing in, the isolation deepening as trust became a fragile commodity. Livia Conti's intelligence was invaluable, but even she remained an enigma, her loyalty as shifting as the masks around them. At a lavish ball beneath crystal chandeliers, the music swelled in a crescendo of strings and whispers. Elias moved through the crowd, every masked face a potential enemy or ally, every glance a question mark. The swirl of silk and perfume, the shimmer of gold and the shadow of secrets. Venice was a city transformed, a stage set for deception. He caught sight of Livia, her dark hair cascading over an elaborate gold mask, eyes sharp and unreadable. Their brief exchange of glances was charged with unspoken tension. Trust was a luxury neither could afford. As midnight approached, Elias's mind raced. The killer's second mask was still out there, blending effortlessly into the throng, a specter slipping through the cracks of his vigilance. The pressure mounted, the stakes rising with every heartbeat. In the quiet moments between chaos, Elias wrestled with the crushing weight of uncertainty. How could he unmask a killer who was no one and everyone at once, whose true face was a secret wrapped in shadows? The masquerade was a deadly dance, and with each passing night the music grew louder, the steps more perilous. Elias knew the coming nights would test not only his skill but his very grip on reality. The second face was revealed, but the true face remained a mystery. The hunt was far from over, and the clock was ticking relentlessly toward the 13th mask. And somewhere in the swirling crowd, the killer smiled behind a new mask, unseen and untouchable, waiting for the next move. The game was on, and Elias was running out of time. The walls, draped in dark velvets and hung with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow their every move, echoed faint murmurs of clandestine conversations. Their footsteps were muffled by the thick carpets, the only other sounds the occasional crackle of a candle flame and the distant lapping of canal waters against ancient stone. Livia's fingers traced the intricate patterns on an ornate tapestry as she led Elias deeper into the heart of the building, her expression guarded but resolute. "This is where the real power lies," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft rustle of silk and the distant clink of glass. "Not in the open festivities, but behind closed doors like this." Elias nodded, his piercing gray eyes scanning every shadow, every flicker of movement. The masquerade had always been a game of appearances, but here, beneath the surface, the stakes were far higher. "Who are they?" "A secret society," Livia replied, her gaze flickering to a nearby alcove where silhouettes shifted behind translucent curtains. "They've controlled the masks, the festival, and much of Venetian politics for generations. And now, they're entwined with the killer's game." Her words settled heavily between them as they reached a secluded chamber where a single velvet-draped table awaited. Atop it lay a folded letter, its parchment yellowed with age, embossed with a wax seal bearing an unfamiliar emblem. Livia broke the seal with a practiced hand and unfolded the letter carefully, revealing a dense script written in an archaic hand. "This," she said, sliding the document across to Elias, "details the society's manipulation of the masquerade, how they've used it to conceal illicit dealings and silence dissenters. The killer's masks. Just another tool in their arsenal." Elias's eyes narrowed as he absorbed the implications. The killer was no lone wolf. They were a ghost within a greater, more dangerous network. Doubt crept in, gnawing at the edges of his resolve. If the masquerade's very foundation was rigged by this shadowy cabal, then whom could he trust? Outside, the palazzo's grand windows framed the labyrinthine canals, their mirror-like surfaces reflecting the flickering lanterns and the countless masked figures drifting like phantoms through the night. The city itself seemed complicit in the masquerade's deception, its ancient stones harboring secrets as old as Venice itself. A sudden burst of laughter echoed from a nearby piazza, followed by the rapid footsteps of hurried guests disappearing into the maze of alleys. Elias's heart quickened, a stark reminder that beneath the veneer of celebration, danger was never far away. He glanced at Livia, whose eyes met his with a mixture of determination and uncertainty. The lines between ally and adversary blurred further with every revelation. Elias realized that the killer's game was not just about murder. It was a challenge to his very understanding of identity and trust. As they retreated into the shadows, the city's pulse quickened. The masquerade was no longer just a festival. It was a battlefield where every mask concealed a secret, and every secret carried the weight of life or death. Elias steeled himself for the nights ahead, knowing that unmasking the killer would demand more than intellect. It would require him to confront the shadows within himself. The ticking clock of the 30 nights pressed onward, each hour slipping away with a whisper of silk and the faintest echo of footsteps in the dark. The game had changed, and Elias was caught in its deadly dance, a dance where the music played for no one's benefit but the 13th mask's. Yet, amid the swirling mists and shifting faces, one question lingered, sharp and unyielding: how long before the masks fell, and with them the last vestiges of trust? The night deepened, and with it the secrets in the shadows multiplied. He leaned closer, scanning the images Alessandra Fiore had just sent over. Her voice, calm and measured, crackled softly through the encrypted video link. "Look here," she said, pointing to a series of photographs. "Notice the recurring symbols on the masks. They're not random." Elias's eyes narrowed. The masquerade, with all its dazzling disguises and swirling anonymity, held a secret language, one he was only beginning to decode. Each mask bore subtle insignias, cryptic motifs that seemed to correspond to the city's elite families, their histories etched in delicate filigree or hidden in the patterns of lace and jewels. He tapped his fingers on the cluttered desk, the sound sharp in the silence. "So the killer isn't just hiding behind faces," he muttered. "They're weaving a narrative through the masks themselves." Alessandra nodded. "Exactly. And these aren't just any faces, they're a map, a twisted homage, or perhaps a challenge." The weight of that realization settled heavily on Elias. The killer was not simply a ghost lurking in the crowd, but a puppeteer, pulling strings in the shadows, using the masquerade as a stage for a deadly performance. Every victim, every mask, was a piece of a larger puzzle that connected back to Venice's tangled web of power, betrayal, and long-buried grudges. His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock. Marco Bellini stepped inside, his expression grim. "We need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him. "I've been digging into the background of those symbols. They lead to some influential names families with a lot to lose if this gets out." Elias gestured toward the screen, where Alessandra's analysis flickered. "We're looking at a conspiracy that runs deep. The killer's playing a dangerous game, and the stakes just got higher." Marco paced the room, rubbing his beard thoughtfully. "We're running out of time. The more we dig, the more enemies we make." The tension in the air was palpable, a silent storm brewing beneath the veneer of their alliance. Despite their shared goal, distrust lingered between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of the precariousness of their situation. Later that evening, Elias found himself alone in a shadowed corner of the grand ballroom where the masquerade's glittering chaos unfolded. Livia Conti approached silently, her mask shimmering under the crystal chandeliers. She handed him a folded note, her eyes flickering with a mixture of urgency and caution. "This might help," she whispered, before melting back into the swirling crowd. Elias unfolded the note carefully. It contained a list of names, dates, and cryptic references that aligned unnervingly with Alessandra's findings. The killer's trail was threading through the city's most untouchable circles, cloaked beneath layers of tradition and secrecy. As the night deepened, the weight of the investigation pressed down on Elias, back at his quarters. He stared out over the labyrinthine canals, the water reflecting the fractured light of the moon. The ticking clock was relentless, each second a reminder of the narrowing window to unmask the killer. His mind raced, haunted by memories of past failures and the growing fear that he might be chasing shadows, or worse, that the shadows were chasing him. The masks the killer wore were not just physical disguises, but metaphors for the shifting allegiances and fragmented truths that surrounded him. In the quiet solitude, Elias's resolve wavered. The fragments of truth he had uncovered were shards of a mirror reflecting not only the killer's deception, but the fragile state of his own identity. Trust was a scarce commodity, and every revelation carried the risk of deeper betrayal. Yet, despite the mounting paranoia and psychological strain, Elias knew he could not falter. The masquerade was far more than a festival. It was a battleground where every mask worn was a weapon, and the final face to be revealed could mean salvation or destruction. The night stretched before him, filled with uncertain shadows and hidden dangers. As the clock edged closer to midnight, Elias steeled himself for the trials yet to come. The fragments of truth guiding him through the labyrinth of lies and masks that defined the deadly game. Elias Varga moved cautiously through the labyrinthine alleyways, his breath shallow and eyes scanning every shadow. The city's festive veneer was deceptive. Beneath it, a predator lurked, one that had just come terrifyingly close. He ducked behind a crumbling wall, heart hammering against his ribs. The narrow alley was slick with damp, the smell of brine and rot thick in the air. Somewhere downstream, a gondolier's song drifted, haunting and sorrowful. Elias's hand brushed the cold stone, grounding himself as adrenaline surged. Then, without warning, a figure lunged from the darkness. The glint of a blade flashed, slicing the air where Elias had stood moments before. Instinct took over. He twisted, narrowly evading the strike. Pain blossomed along his side as he stumbled, the sharp sting reminding him how close he had come to death. Breathing hard, Elias pivoted, searching for his attacker. But the alley was empty again, save for the lingering echo of footsteps fading toward the canal. The killer had vanished once more, leaving behind a chilling promise. Elias pressed his hand against the wound, grimacing. This was no longer a game of observation and deduction, it was a fight for survival. The killer was not only outpacing him, but toying with him, drawing him deeper into a deadly dance. He made his way to the rendezvous point, an unassuming apartment overlooking a quiet canal. Marco Bellini was already there, pacing with a restless energy that seemed to fill the room. The detective's gruff features were etched with concern as he glanced up. "Thought you'd be more careful," Marco said, voice rough. "You're lucky to be alive." Elias managed a grim smile, wincing as he eased onto a worn leather chair. Luck's running thin. The room was dim, lit only by a flickering candle that cast long, wavering shadows on the peeling plaster. The distant strains of the masquerade's music floated through the open window, a stark contrast to the tension that hung between the two men. "We need to rethink this," Elias said, fingers brushing the blood drying at his side. "The killer knows us better than we know him." "He's anticipating our moves?" Marco nodded, his eyes narrowing. "And if he's this close, no one's safe, not even us." Their uneasy partnership had always been fraught with tension, but the near-death experience cracked open old wounds and silent suspicions. Doubts whispered in the silence, who could be trusted? Was betrayal lurking just beneath the surface? A sudden knock at the door broke the heavy stillness. Elias's hand instinctively went to the concealed pistol at his waist. Livia Conti stepped inside, her elegant mask catching the candlelight, eyes sharp and alert. "I have news," she said, voice low but urgent. "The society we suspected, they're moving faster than we thought. There's a meeting tonight, and I have a way in." Elias studied her carefully. Livia's loyalty had always been a question mark, her motives tangled between family allegiance and their shared goal. But now, with the killer's shadow looming larger, he had no choice but to accept her help. As they laid out the plan, Sofia Marini's earlier whispers echoed in Elias's mind. The masquerade was no longer just a backdrop. It was a weapon, a mask behind which death stalked. Later, alone in his room, Elias stood before a cracked Venetian mirror. The fractured reflection stared back at him, masked yet broken. The lines between hunter and hunted blurred, and the weight of past failures pressed heavily on his shoulders. He clenched his fists, resolve hardening. This was no longer a simple chase. It was a test of identity, trust, and survival. He would have to adapt, to outthink a killer who wore not just masks, but lies, betrayal, and shadows. Outside, the city's heartbeat pulsed on, indifferent to the peril lurking in its alleys. The clock was ticking, and for Elias Varga, every second was a gamble. The night was far from over, and so was the hunt. The moon cast fractured silver patterns on the water's surface, mirroring the fractured truths that gnawed at his mind. Around him, the crowd moved like a living tide, faces hidden behind ornate masks, their identities as fluid as the waters beneath. He paused, gripping the cold iron railing, eyes scanning the swirling masses, trying to pierce the veil of anonymity that cloaked Venice's masquerade. He had come to understand that the killer was no mere murderer. This was a puppeteer weaving a deadly game of shadows, manipulating not only appearances, but the very loyalties of those around him. Each mask was more than a disguise. It was a weapon, a tool to fracture trust, to sow chaos among allies. The realization struck Elias like a cold wave. The killer's power transcended flesh and bone. It was the power to redefine reality itself. Earlier that evening, he had met with Livia Conti in a secluded salon nestled within a palazzo whose faded grandeur whispered secrets of centuries past. The room was bathed in golden candlelight, shadows dancing against frescoed walls as a soft violin melody drifted from a distant chamber. Livia's eyes held a glint of both warmth and calculation as she spoke in hushed tones, her words laced with the delicate poison of ambiguity. "The game is deeper than you think, Elias," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Masks aren't just worn on faces here. They're worn on hearts, on intentions. Trust is the rarest mask of all." Elias nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. Their alliance was tenuous, forged in necessity rather than conviction. Yet, in this labyrinth of deceit, Livia's knowledge was a beacon if he could trust it. Later, in a narrow alley flanked by crumbling brick and flickering lanterns, Marco Bellini confronted a shadowed figure whose intentions were as obscured as the night. The detective's voice was low, edged with the roughness of years spent navigating Venice's underbelly. "You think this city's secrets are yours to keep? Think again." The echo of footsteps filled the silence that followed, a tense standoff that spoke volumes of fractured loyalties and unspoken threats. Marco's pragmatism clashed with Elias's analytical mind, yet both knew the necessity of their uneasy partnership. At a bustling café alive with the murmur of masquerade guests and the clatter of glasses, Sofia Marini moved with practiced subtlety. Her sharp eyes met Elias's across the crowded room before she slid a folded note beneath his cup. The gesture was brief, almost imperceptible, but the urgency in her gaze was unmistakable. Elias unfolded the note, the ink smeared slightly as if the message had been written in haste. It contained names, places, whisperings of a secret society pulling strings behind the festival's glittering facade. The weight of this knowledge settled heavily on him. The killer's manipulations extended far beyond the physical realm. This was a psychological labyrinth designed to ensnare. As the night deepened, Elias felt the walls closing in. Every interaction was now shadowed by doubt. Every alliance questioned through the prism of suspicion. The masks weren't just on faces, they were on intentions, on alliances, on the very essence of truth. In this city of masks within masks, Elias faced a daunting question. How to unmask a killer who thrived on deception when even his own reflection seemed alien? The clock ticked relentlessly toward midnight, the deadline inching closer with every breath. The masquerade's music swelled, a haunting symphony that seemed to mock the fragile bonds of trust. Elias's resolve hardened, but beneath the professional exterior, a storm of paranoia and fear churned, threatening to consume him. Tonight, the game had shifted. The killer was no longer merely hiding behind a mask, he was rewriting the rules. And Elias had to find a way to see through the illusions before the final mask fell and the deadly dance reached its climax. He took a deep breath, stepping back onto the bridge. The crowd surged around him, faces flickering like specters beneath their masks. Somewhere among them, the killer smiled behind an ever-changing mask, weaving lies and betrayal. Elias's eyes narrowed. He would not be another pawn in this deadly masquerade. Not tonight. But as the first chime of midnight echoed through the Venetian night, a cold certainty settled over him. In a city where masks hid not only faces but souls, the greatest danger was losing himself.